I never believed in those movie moments where time just stops. You know, where everything goes quiet and the world narrows down to just two people. I thought that was all Hollywood nonsense, the kind of thing that sells tickets but never actually happens to real people like me. But then again, I never expected to meet someone like Oliver on the 42 bus to downtown. It was a Thursday evening in late September, one of those perfect autumn days where the air has just enough chill to feel refreshing but the sun still has some warmth left in it. I was heading home from my graphic design job at a small agency in the city, exhausted from staring at screens all day, my eyes burning, my shoulders tight from hunching over my desk. The bus was more crowded than usual, probably because of some event downtown, and I barely managed to snag a window seat near the back. I put my earbuds in, pulled up my usual playlist, and prepared for the 40-minute ride back to my apartment. The bus lurched forward, and that's when he got on. I noticed him immediately, which was strange because I usually keep to myself on public transit, lost in my own world. But there was something about him that made me look up from my phone. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark, wavy hair that fell just above his eyes, and he wore this forest green jacket that somehow looked both casual and put together. He had a worn leather messenger bag slung across his body, and he was looking around for a seat with this slightly anxious expression, like he was running late for something important. Our eyes met for just a second, and I felt this weird flutter in my chest that I immediately tried to ignore. He moved down the aisle as the bus started moving again, stumbling slightly as it turned a corner, and ended up right next to my seat, the only empty seat left. He looked down at me with these incredibly blue eyes and asked, "Can I sit here?" And I nodded, pulling my bag onto my lap to make room. My heart was doing this stupid racing thing that I told myself was just because I'd had too much coffee that day. He sat down, and I caught the faint scent of his cologne, something woodsy and clean that made me want to lean closer, which was absolutely ridiculous. I forced myself to look back at my phone, pretending to be absorbed in scrolling through social media, but I was hyper-aware of every movement he made beside me. The way he settled into his seat, the way he pulled out a book from his bag, the way his knee was just inches from mine. I snuck a glance at what he was reading. Some philosophy book I'd never heard of, but the margins were filled with notes in neat handwriting. He read with complete focus, occasionally underlining something or writing a quick note, and there was something incredibly attractive about watching someone be that engaged with ideas. I found myself wondering what he was thinking about, what passages were resonating with him enough to mark them. The bus continued its route, stopping and starting in the usual traffic, and I went back to my phone, though I wasn't really seeing anything on the screen. I was too distracted by his presence, by the warmth radiating from him in the small space we shared, by the way he turned pages with long fingers that looked like they might play piano or guitar. About 20 minutes into the ride, I noticed his reading had slowed down. He was blinking more, his head starting to dip slightly before he'd catch himself and straighten up. The bus's gentle rocking motion, the warm late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, the fact that he'd probably had a long day too, it was all conspiring to make him drowsy. I watched out of the corner of my eye as he fought against it, clearly trying to stay awake, but gradually losing the battle. Then it happened. His head tilted to the side, and suddenly his temple was resting against my shoulder. Just like that, the weight of him, warm and solid and real, pressed against me. I froze completely, my breath catching in my throat, my whole body going rigid with surprise and something else, something that felt dangerously like longing. I should have woken him up. That would have been the normal thing to do, the polite thing. A gentle nudge, a quiet "excuse me," and he would have apologized, embarrassed, and moved away. But I didn't do that. Instead, I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, afraid that any movement might disturb him. His hair was touching my neck, soft and slightly tickling, and I could feel his breath, slow and even, warm against my collar. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he'd feel it, sure the whole bus could hear it, but he slept on peacefully, his book sliding down to rest against his lap, his body relaxed and trusting in a way that made my chest ache. I looked down at him, at his face so close to mine, peaceful in sleep, his eyelashes dark against his cheeks, a tiny scar near his eyebrow that I wanted to ask about, lips slightly parted, and I felt something shift inside me, something I'd been trying not to acknowledge for longer than I cared to admit. I'd known I was attracted to men since college, but I'd never really let myself feel it fully. Never pursued it, never acted on it. I'd had a girlfriend in high school, convinced myself that was what I wanted, what I was supposed to want. But sitting there with this beautiful stranger asleep on my shoulder, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This feeling, this warmth spreading through my chest, this desperate desire to protect this moment and make it last forever. This was real in a way nothing else had ever been. The bus continued its route, and I watched the stops pass by one after another. My stop was coming up in about 10 minutes, the corner of 5th and Madison, and I started to feel this rising panic at the thought of having to move, having to wake him, having to let this moment end. I looked at the digital display at the front of the bus showing the next stops, watching my stop get closer and closer, and I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to wake him. I was going to miss my stop, deliberately, intentionally, just to give him a few more minutes of sleep, just to keep him here beside me a little longer, and just to hold on to this feeling for as long as I possibly could. 5th and Madison came and went. I watched it pass through the window, watched the familiar coffee shop where I sometimes grabbed breakfast, the bookstore I browsed on weekends, all of it sliding by while I sat motionless, this stranger sleeping peacefully against my shoulder. I didn't care that I'd have to walk back or catch another bus. I didn't care that it was getting later and I had work tomorrow. All I cared about was this moment, this connection, this feeling that something important was happening even though we hadn't exchanged more than 5 words. The bus rolled on through downtown, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the streets. Other passengers got on and off, some glancing at us with soft smiles, probably thinking we were a couple, and I didn't correct them even in my own mind. I just sat there, feeling the weight of him against me, breathing in the scent of his cologne mixed with something that was just him, watching the city pass by outside the window. I started noticing little details about him that I'd remember later, that I knew even then I'd replay in my mind over and over. The way his breathing was so steady and calm. The slight stubble on his jaw that caught the light. A small hole in the sleeve of his jacket, like he'd caught it on something and never bothered to fix it. The silver watch on his wrist that looked vintage, maybe inherited. All these tiny details that felt impossibly precious. I found myself wondering about his life. What did he do? Was he a student, given the philosophy book? Or maybe he just read for pleasure, trying to make sense of the world like everyone else? Did he live alone or with roommates? Did he have someone waiting for him at home? Someone who got to see him like this every day, peaceful and unguarded? The thought made my stomach twist with jealousy, which was absurd considering I didn't even know his name. Around the 30-minute mark of his sleep, I felt him start to stir slightly. His breathing changed, became less deep, and I knew he was starting to wake up. I felt a wave of disappointment so strong it almost hurt, but also nervousness about what would happen when he realized where he was, what he'd been doing. Would he be embarrassed, apologetic? Would he think I was weird for not waking him? He shifted against my shoulder, and I felt him tense as consciousness returned, that moment when you wake up somewhere unexpected and have to piece together where you are. He sat up suddenly, pulling away from me, and I immediately missed his warmth, the space he left behind on my shoulder feeling cold and empty. "Oh my God," he said, his voice rough with sleep, his eyes wide with mortification as he looked at me. "I'm so sorry. I completely passed out. How long was I asleep?" You should have woken me up." He was blushing, actually blushing, his cheeks turning pink as he ran a hand through his hair, trying to smooth it down. It made him look younger, more vulnerable, and even more attractive somehow. "It's okay," I said, and my voice came out softer than I intended, almost intimate. "You weren't out that long. You seemed like you needed the sleep." "Still," he said, shaking his head. "That's so embarrassing. I had such a long day, and I guess it just caught up with me. I can't believe I just fell asleep on a complete stranger." "Really, it's fine," I assured him, and I meant it. More than fine, actually, but I couldn't say that. I was just reading on my phone. I didn't mind. He smiled at me then, this grateful, genuine smile that made his whole face light up, and I felt my heart do that stupid fluttering thing again. "Thank you for being cool about it," he said. "Most people probably would have shoved me off immediately." We fell into silence for a moment, but it wasn't awkward. It felt comfortable, like we'd known each other longer than just this bus ride. He glanced out the window, then looked at the display showing the stops, and his expression changed to confusion. "Wait, where are we?" he asked, leaning forward to get a better look. "We're way past downtown. How long was I actually asleep?" "About 30 minutes, I admitted, and I watched as he processed this, his eyes widening. 30 minutes. He looked at me with something between amazement and horror. "And you just let me sleep? Where's your stop?" I hesitated for just a second before answering. "Fifth and Madison, about 20 minutes ago." His jaw literally dropped. "You missed your stop? Because I was sleeping on you? Why didn't you wake me up?" I shrugged, trying to seem casual even though my heart was racing. "Like I said, you seemed like you needed it. It's not a big deal. I can just catch the bus back." He stared at me like I was some kind of alien species he'd never encountered before. "That's incredibly kind," he said slowly. "Like, weirdly kind. Nobody does that for strangers." "Maybe I'm weird then," I said with a small laugh, trying to lighten the moment, trying to hide how much his presence was affecting me. "No," he said quickly, his voice earnest. "Not weird, just really, really nice." He paused, then extended his hand. "I'm Oliver, by the way. I feel like if you're going to let me drool on your shoulder for half an hour, I should at least know your name." I laughed at that, taking his hand. "I'm Reed." And for the record, there was no drooling. His hand was warm and his grip was firm, and we held the handshake just a beat longer than necessary, our eyes meeting and holding. Something passed between us in that moment, some kind of recognition or understanding that I couldn't quite name, but could definitely feel. "Well, Reed," Oliver said, still holding my hand, "let me at least buy you a coffee or something, to apologize for making you miss your stop and to thank you for being such a good human being." My brain was screaming at me to say yes, but my mouth was being stupid and cautious. "You don't have to do that," I said. "Really, it's fine." "I know I don't have to," he said, and there was something in his eyes, something warm and interested that made my breath catch. "But I want to. Please." "There's a great coffee shop at the next stop, unless you need to get home right away." I thought about my empty apartment, the frozen dinner waiting in my freezer, the Netflix queue that would still be there tomorrow. "No," I said, feeling bold and reckless and more alive than I had in months. "Coffee sounds great." The smile he gave me could have powered the entire city. "Perfect," he said, and I noticed he still hadn't let go of my hand. "We can get off at the next stop." We rode the last few minutes in comfortable silence, but everything felt different now, charged, purposeful. We weren't strangers sharing a bus seat anymore. We were two people who had chosen to extend this moment to see where it might lead. His knee bumped against mine as the bus turned a corner, and this time neither of us moved away. When the bus stopped, we got off together, stepping out into the early evening air that had turned cooler now that the sun was setting. The coffee shop he'd mentioned was right there on the corner, a cozy-looking place with warm lights and the smell of fresh espresso drifting out the door. "After you," Oliver said, holding the door open for me, and I walked past him into the warmth, feeling like I was walking into something much bigger than just a coffee shop, like I was walking into a story that was just beginning. We ordered our drinks, his treat despite my protests, and found a small table by the window. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, like we'd been friends for years instead of having just met an hour ago. He was a graduate student in philosophy, which explained the book, working on his thesis about existentialism and authentic living. He talked about ideas with such passion and clarity that I found myself completely absorbed, watching his hands gesture as he explained concepts, watching his eyes light up when he hit on a point he was particularly excited about. I told him about my work in graphic design, about the frustration of client revisions and the satisfaction of a project coming together perfectly. He listened like what I was saying actually mattered, asking questions, making connections between design and philosophy that I'd never considered before. The coffee shop started to empty out as it got later, but neither of us seemed to notice or care. We talked about everything and nothing, books and movies and music, childhood memories and future dreams, the conversation weaving and flowing like we were creating something together, building something with our words. At one point, he leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his face close to mine, and said, "Can I tell you something weird? I almost missed my stop on purpose today before I fell asleep. I saw you when I got on the bus and I thought you were really attractive and I was trying to work up the courage to say something to you. Then I fell asleep instead, which is possibly the least smooth thing I've ever done." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You thought I was attractive?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Still do," he said simply, his blue eyes holding mine. "Very much so." I took a breath, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something high and terrifying and exhilarating. I missed my stop on purpose, too, I admitted. Not almost, I actually did it. Because I didn't want you to wake up yet. Because I didn't want the moment to end. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, slow and warm and beautiful. "So we're both weird then," he said softly. "Looks like it," I agreed. And I was smiling too, so wide my cheeks hurt. He reached across the table and took my hand, the same way we'd shaken hands on the bus, but different this time. Intentional. Intimate. His thumb brushed across my knuckles and I felt that touch all the way through my body. "Reed," he said, and the way he said my name felt important, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth, like he planned to say it many more times. "I know this is crazy. We just met. But I really don't want this to be the last time I see you." "Me neither," I said, squeezing his hand. "Definitely not. Can I take you to dinner sometime? Like an actual date?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, feeling tears prick at my eyes for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Joy, maybe. Relief. The overwhelming feeling of something falling into place that I hadn't even known was out of alignment. We exchanged numbers, making plans for Saturday night, and when we finally left the coffee shop, it was fully dark outside. He insisted on riding the bus back with me to make sure I got home safely, even though it was completely out of his way. We sat close together on the ride back, our shoulders touching, our hands intertwined, talking quietly about nothing important, just wanting to hear each other's voices. When we got to my stop, he walked me to my building. We stood outside in the cool night air, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. I had the strangest feeling that my whole life had just changed on a random Thursday evening, that I'd gotten on a bus as one person, and I was getting off as someone completely different, someone braver and more honest and more open to possibility. Oliver stepped closer, and I could see the question in his eyes, the hope and nervousness that probably mirrored my own. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, And I loved that he asked, loved that even in this moment of courage he was still gentle and respectful. Yes, I breathed, and he leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to change my mind, but I didn't want to change my mind. I wanted this more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. His lips met mine softly at first, tentative and questioning, and then with more certainty as I kissed him back. It was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and exciting and full of promise. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling like idiots. "I'll see you Saturday," he said, his forehead resting against mine. "Saturday," I confirmed, and I watched him walk away, turning back twice to wave, until he disappeared around the corner. I went up to my apartment, feeling like I was floating, like my feet weren't quite touching the ground. I thought about how I'd almost woken him up on that bus, how close I'd come to doing the normal thing, the expected thing, how different my life would be right now if I had. But I'd taken a chance, made a choice, missed my stop on purpose, and everything had changed. Sometimes the best moments in life come from the decisions that don't make logical sense, from the times we choose connection over convenience, from the moments we let ourselves be vulnerable enough to feel something real. I'd spent so long being careful, being cautious, protecting myself from disappointment and hurt. But sitting on that bus with Oliver asleep on my shoulder, I'd made a different choice. I'd chosen possibility over safety. I'd chosen him. And as I got ready for bed that night, my phone already showing a text from him saying he'd gotten home safely and he couldn't wait for Saturday, I knew with absolute certainty that it was the best decision I'd ever made. That missed bus stop had led me exactly where I needed to be.